and Theo and Sheena and Brian and Kirsten, and I just feel like I've made so many friends at the survey. So it's good to be in your company. So for those of you that I don't know, I'm Joey Orr, and I'm curator for research at the Spencer Museum of Art. I run a program called the Integrated Arts Research Initiative. And the idea behind the program is that we're interested in knowing what the urgent questions are that are coming up for researchers at KU across the sciences and humanities, and then partnering with KU researchers and bringing in contemporary artists who are working with those same issues or those same sets of questions to do a kind of collaborative inquiry. And so we're at the very early stages of a project with Janine Antoni, and I'm going to introduce her briefly. I just want to say we're at the Spencer Museum, we're deeply honored to be working with Janine. And in thinking about how to introduce her, I decided not to do this long list of accolades about her accomplishments and awards, because we felt like it was more important for this group to know something about her making. But for those of you who are not familiar with Janine, I do just want to say briefly that her importance and influence in the field of contemporary art is just absolutely not in dispute. I studied Janine's work for years and years and years before I ever met her and called her a friend. So we're just very pleased to have her here. So Janine is based in New York, but was born in Freeport, Bahamas. She's known for her unusual processes, using her body as both tool and source of meaning. Her early methods involved transforming unique materials such as chocolate and soap through habitual everyday processes like bathing, eating, and sleeping to create sculptural works and installations. The body is at the center of her work, and the artistic process of making makes the meaning of the work. So the result always calls back to how it was made through performance or participation. So that's just a few very brief notes, and I will pass it to Janine and start sharing my screen.
Great, thank you, Joey. So I guess I should just start by saying thanks for having me. I'm so thrilled that you all came to have lunch and listen to me. And the idea here is really to be in conversation and to learn from you. But I just wanted to kind of give you a background, a little background of my work, and give you my aspirations for what I could do at the field station, and then see what you think. So I want to start with one work that kind of explains the way in which I work and how I like to work with other fields, and how the work finds itself in the cross section between these other fields than my own. And I find when I do that, that my work is much more innovative, it's much more layered, and it becomes something that I could never dream of on my own. So I love to work with people and other ways of thinking. So this piece is called Slumber. And as Joey said, I work with everyday activities, and I wanted to make a piece in my sleep. And so I thought, how can I do that? And this in the end became the answer to that question. So first I'm going to tell you what you're looking at. So I invented a loom. I'm not a weaver. I worked with a weaver to figure out how I could take a normal loom and expand it into the space of a room. So what is peculiar about this loom is that all of the warp threads, which are those long threads, go all the way across the room and stay connected to their spools. There's 150 spools there on that kind of, almost looks like a bookshelf back there. The weaving apparatus on the other side of the room, and at the center of this loom is a bed. So what I did is I slept in this bed. I hooked myself up to that machine you see on the left. It's called a polysomnograph. It's a basic EKG machine. It's used to record the movement of your eyes while you're sleeping. So this is where the other fields come in. I worked with a neurophysiologist that studied sleep to teach me how to record my rapid eye movement. I get about 1,500 pages of information in one night, and how to go through that and see which sections were my dreams. I isolated those sections and I used them as a pattern to weave a really long blanket. So I would sleep in the bed, record my dreams, get on the loom, transform them into the blanket by using strips from my nightgown. So the actual pattern in the blanket is my REM. And then I would get back in the bed and sleep with my dreams transformed into the blanket. So it was really interesting. As you can imagine, there's a lot of sleep clinics around New York. So I called them all up. And finally, I found a doctor, Dr. Michael Thorpe. He works in the sleep, he calls his clinic the Sleep-Wake Disorder Clinic. And he just happened to be a guy who liked to collect artists that depicted sleep. So he was my perfect collaborator. And so I went down to his office and he started to tell me his philosophy on sleep. And he said, when you're looking at sleep disorders, you can't only look at the night, you have to look at the day. Just as we go through different patterns of being awake in the day, we go through different patterns of being asleep at night, and those are interrelated. So my piece is a result of his philosophy because what I'm doing in the day relates to what I'm doing in the night. So let's keep going, Joey. So here I am sleeping in the bed, hooked up to the machine. You can see the paper there on the left. Go ahead, Joey. So here I am, polysomnograph on your left. That's weirdly enough, when you dream, that image that you're seeing actually mirrors each other, and that's how you can figure out which are your dreams. Then I would take that, graph it out, and you can see I had a blue nightgown here that I'm literally drawing the REM into the blanket. Go ahead, Joey. You can, yeah. So this is me every day in the museum or gallery, weaving my dreams, and people are coming in and talking to me about what I'm doing. And so I'm telling this story, and it's the story of the woman weaving, which we know from literature. We know it from Shakespeare, we know it from the Lady of Shalott. Pretty much every culture has a story of the woman weaving. And they're mythical stories, which for me was, a way of connecting to my dreams as well. So it was very interesting for me to be working with craftsperson on the one side and scientists on the other side. And when I went to do it in Zurich, I think it was, I got to travel around the world doing this piece, and I got to Zurich and the polysomnograph wouldn't work. So we got some sleep technicians over, and I said, can you set the machine that, the way you would in the sleep clinic? And they said, oh, we have a great idea. Since you're weaving a blanket, we can set the machine in this way that will give you a really nice line in the blanket. And I said, no. I want you to do it like you do when you're doing, a test on somebody. And he was like, well, if you have sleep apnea, we set it this way. If you have erectile dysfunction, we set it this way. You want to weave a blanket, so we want to set it this way. So what was interesting to me is that the scientists had much easier time at meeting me in the work creatively than the craftsperson, who was like, a loom will never work in the way that you want to make it. Anyway, let's keep going, Joey. So this piece is called Touch, and I wanted to show it to you because this image or this place is the view that I see from my bedroom growing up. I grew up in the Bahamas, so this horizon line is probably the image I looked at most in my life. And I was looking through my work thinking I wanted to show you a picture of the body in the landscape. And this is the landscape that I'm comfortable with. So Kansas landscape seems very exotic to me, as this might seem to you. But the piece came out of looking at this horizon and remembering my mother, who used to say this thing, a saying in Caribbean, she'd say, Janine, go out and see the world, because this little island we come from is behind God's back, meaning that our island was so small that not even God noticed it. And so for some reason, this horizon felt like the world out there. And the funny thing about the horizon is it's not real point in space, right? The closer you get to it, the more it recedes. So I decided at some point, this was the line of my imagination. And I wanted to see if I could balance on that line. So I learned to tightrope. I went to the Bahamas. I set up this tightrope on the beach, just high enough so that when the weight of my body went on the rope, that I would just balance in this place for just a moment. And so what you're seeing is one still from the video, where most of the time I'm swaying all over the place, trying to remain on the rope, and the illusion that I'm walking on the horizon happens. Okay, Joey, take it over.
Okay, well, we interrupt this artist talk for a brief art history lesson. So I'm just actually going to situate the project we're about to talk about in a broader scope of practice. One thing to say is that a commonality between environmental studies and environmentally embedded art is the understanding of connectivity between environment and culture. The various monikers, land art, environmental art, eco art, designate various commitments to site, ephemerality, ecological reconstruction, political activisms, and more. So in 1968, there was an actual exhibition that was curated called Earthworks at the Dwan Gallery. And the roster of exhibiting artists came to be known under this, this moniker, Earthworks. Very generally, the movement was about fleeing the pristine white cube of galleries and institutions. And it was also meant to be a move away from art that was oriented strictly around object making. So what I'm showing you here is Robert Smithson's Spiral Jetty from 1970, just because I think this is probably the most famous and most well-known image we have of this kind of practice. It's located at Roselle Point Peninsula in the Great Salt Lake in Utah. It's made with over 6,000 tons of black basalt rocks and earth from the site. It is a 1,500 foot long spiral, 15 feet wide, that winds counterclockwise off the shore and into the water. And it's now managed by the Dia Arts Foundation. Spiral Jetty is an earthwork, but also a series of writings and a film addressing its site and ideas of deep geological time. I also show this because it's illustrative of a kind of early earthwork that shifts enormous quantities of earth, rock, and minerals to fashion monumental site-specific forms. And I'm showing you this as a counterpoint. So this is Richard Long's A Line Made by Walking from 1967, in which the artist walked backwards and forwards in a field until the flattened turf caught the sunlight and became visible as a line. A number of artists have created such ephemeral works, sometimes using materials from the site and just generally using a much lighter touch on the environment. This is a work by artist Alan Sonfist called Time Landscape. It's a large-scale environmental sculpture in Lower Manhattan consisting of plants that were native to the area in pre-colonial times. The artist has discussed this as a natural memorial to land's historical past and the fragility of our environment. After proposal and planning, it was unveiled in 1978 at the corner of LaGuardia Place and West Houston Street. Post-colonial plants do intrude, which may sound familiar to those of you that work at the field station. The artist does allow for this, but a city department apparently weeds and incinerates invaders occasionally. Alan Sonfus does have work in the Spencer Museum's collection. It's a canvas of rubbings of roots of trees that the artist played in as a kid in the woods. And Sheena, when I told you that I needed to come out to the field station and collect 2 pounds of soil for an artist's new work, it's this artist who was requesting that. So this piece is by Mel Chin. It's called Revival Field. It was begun in 1991, and it was done in conjunction with Dr. Rufus Cheney, senior agronomist for the U.S. Department of Agriculture. The piece is realized in St. Paul, Minnesota, in a landfill, and they use hyperaccumulator plants to extract heavy metals from contaminated soil. So they were using a process of green remediation, which harvests and then incinerates the plants to recover and recycle the metals. Mel Chin has described this as sculpting a site's ecology. So it's a reference to like a literal subtractive process or a reductive sculpting method in which a material is moved in the shaping of form. And it exists now as a remediated park. You will notice that so far I have only been talking about male artists, and this is one of the critiques of early land art as these kind of monumental machismo gestures. But there is certainly a robust history of women artists working in this form as well, including Beverly Buchanan, Judy Chicago, Agnes Dean, Nancy Holt, if any of you are interested in those references. And here, of course, Ana Mendieta. The work on your left is actually a photograph that's in the Spencer's collection. So if you ever want to see it, let us know. It's part of her Silhouette series, in which Mendieta photo documented remains of a private sculptural performance, marking the impression of her body by molding soil and sand in a stream bed. She was an exile of Cuba, and she was interested in a forging together of earth and the body. And so with that, Janine, I will pass it back to you.
Great, thank you. So earth and the body. This is a piece that I made that sort of takes you from the earth to the body. What you're looking at here is a loader bucket from a tractor. What I did is I took that bucket and I cut it in half and I melted it down. You can change slides, Joey. So I melted it down to these objects inside. What you're looking at is an agricultural bucket. Inside of that is an excavator. Inside of that is a snow shovel, a garden shovel, a fireplace shovel, a serving spoon, a soup spoon, and a loop spoon, which is the spoon you give to a baby when it's first learning to feed itself. So the piece really takes you from the earth to the home to the body. And this is the territory that I'm interested in working in for the field station. Go ahead, Joe. So my last big project was at Greenwood Cemetery in New York. I was so lucky to be chosen as an artist to work there. And I was given anywhere in the cemetery to work, and I chose the catacombs because they were the most spectacular sight. And I showed a series of pieces in the vaults of the catacombs. So over a couple years, I worked on pieces that were inspired by the icon, the religious icon. And I became fascinated with the icon because there's a belief that when you pray to the icon, you're not praying to the image, but the image is actually a portal to the divine. So when you pray to it, the divine is looking at you through the image, which seems like a crazy, amazing thing to believe. And so I've been working on ideas of embodiment for quite a while. And I wanted to isolate some gestures that have come to me at the moments when I felt most embodied, and kind of revere them in the way that you would an icon. So here we are with your traditional altarpiece, which is usually a triptych. So normally in a triptych, you would put the main deity at the center, and then it would be flanked by two saints or two angels. For me, my main deity is the earth. So that's why that middle section just has earth in it. And then I've spent a lot of time trying to ground my body. And that's why the feet replaced the angels. And as I was making these pieces, I was very interested in this idea that we've come to believe that memories are lodged in the body. And sometimes we can't remember them in the mind, but somehow the body holds them. And it sometimes reminds us of them. And so I thought, if my memories are stored in my body, could I actively seed my body with certain ideas? So with each of the pieces that I made, I created a little, I don't know what we want to call it, prayer, mantra, text, poetic something. And that accompanied a gesture, which when I showed these pieces in the vaults, I had performers come and perform these gestures and repeat these texts. So I'm gonna recite the one that I wrote for this piece for you. The earth supports me. The earth holds me. The earth receives me. I am fertile ground. The earth supports me. The earth holds me. The earth receives me. I am fertile ground. So that little text sort of goes from the idea of being grounded on the earth to slowly becoming the earth, which is, of course, we're in a cemetery. So that is what's happening. And I guess I should reveal my fantasies about being dead. And that is that I will become one with everything. And also some idea of, through that kind of dispersal of self, that I become interconnected with the world at that point. So, so I'm going to show you another piece, which is one that I did with my mom and dad. I just lost my dad, but they were in their 80s and 90s. My mom has dementia, and my father's had a lot of small strokes. So both of them are compromised neurologically, and their language is compromised, and memory and finding words and so forth. And I noticed over the years that touch started to replace talking to each other. And I was completely moved by how they were always embraced all night long, all day long. And so I wanted to somehow capture that. So they're both in bed. My mom is awake, my dad's sleeping. I take out my gold body paint and I put some gold paint on my mom's hand and my dad's ear, and she falls back asleep, and she's sort of almost like, the touch is almost like an animal looking for warmth. And I'm taking pictures. And at one point she grabs his earlobe like this, and I captured the image. So let me read you the little text that I wrote for this piece. I reach out with my touch. Your words spiral in. I touch your listening. We curl into each other. I reach out with my touch. Your words spiral in. I touch your listening. We curl into each other. So I came to the conclusion that the measure of love is the quality of our listening. And I should tell you a little bit about how this is made. Also a little bit about the icon. Remember I said that the idea of the icon is that you're looking through the image at something else beyond the image. So the way that's done is that the gold leaf on the icon actually brings the background forward. So the image is piercing the surface. So that's technically how you get that effect. So what happened here is I gold leafed out the bed. And then I took those 3 little bones that you have in the ear and I pressed them into clay. So this crazy top of the frame is made from me pressing those little bones in wet clay over and over and over again. The bottom of the frame is 1 bone from the hand that makes the frame. So so you have these bones that exist, cast bones, impressed bones, extruded bones. And then, I don't know if you can see this, but in the gold leaf itself, I got those bones made into like metal stamps and punched a design into the piece. So I've really, from this point, started to think about embodiment as a form of listening in and listening out. And that brought me to the question of where does the inside meet the outside? And that sort of brought me to the landscape, and sort of asking the questions of what draws us to the landscape, and thinking about the ways in which the landscape enters us and we enter the landscape. Breath is a good example of that. So that kind of brings us to what I'm thinking of for the field station. My aspirations for the piece is that in your experience of it, that you come to the conclusion that you are nature, not apart from nature, that it becomes a place to make those kind of connections, that we don't feel so separate, but we become one. And I have some ideas about how that can happen. I think the first thing I have to do is slow everyone down as they enter the landscape. So I've been looking at anatomical drawings of the ear. And I thought of turning one of these anatomical drawings into a labyrinth. So in the piece that you could walk into this labyrinth, and as you enter into the body, you're also entering into the landscape. And then, crazy enough, as I'm starting to study the anatomy of my ear, which is interesting that is as much wilderness as sometimes the landscape can be, I find out that they actually call the inner ear a labyrinth. So go ahead, Joey. So here we are at the McCall Field. I'm pretty sure a lot of you recognize it. And
yeah, I assume most people will know where this is, but if you're sort of traveling north on this road out towards the actual field station facilities, that little loop on the left is where the Rammed Earth Pavilion is at the Roth Trailhead. And the field that's around that is the Suzanne McCall Reserve, which was bequeathed to the field station in 2010 to sort of buffer native prairie and to be used as an educational site for visitors. Janine, do you want me to skip to the next slide? Okay.
Yep. So that's quick, rough, and ready idea of what it could look like. I mean, our dream right now is that it traverses 3 different kinds of landscape as you go deeper and deeper into the air. I guess we could go to the next slide.
Yeah. And so to your point, Janine, I think one of the interests here is, how might the work itself help advance some of the questions and research that's going on at KU by being in conversation with Janine about the kind of formal development of the work. So this is just a slide to show Janine's first visit, and it was unbelievable how quickly our director, Sarah Lynn, got a Jayhawk on Janine. I've never seen anything like it in my life. But the field station folks were super generous and warm and inviting, and showed us around a lot of the experiments that are happening out there now, and also gave us the opportunity to really just play in the Suzanne Eck McCall Reserve for several days.
So if we go back to the little history lesson that Joey gave us, you know, I could come and try to kind of land a piece in the McCall field and try to give people an experience out there in the field. But I think the most interesting way to actually make the form is if I could collaborate with thinkers and researchers at KU to make the labyrinth itself, the field and the experience be really integrated with what's happening there anyway. That might make the most curious form and the most interesting layered experience, because I feel like, well, what I understood is that there are a lot of people who have no idea what's happening there. So I guess that's why I'm here, is to kind of present to you something extremely open. It's been taken all my control, not to try to imagine too far down the line what this can be, so that I can sort of at this moment in my thinking, open it up and for whoever it intrigues to step in and see how it can take form together. So with that, I think we should just see if anything we said made you think about anything. We're really open to just be in discussion. Thanks.
We'll have to find our little Zoom clappy thing. So I just made it where everybody is welcome to unmute themselves and things like that now. And I think we can just have an open conversation.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, hi, I'm Suzanne Hampton, and I'm a new PhD student in the School of Architecture and Design. Have been practicing architecture and urban design with a focus on sustainable landscapes for some time. And I'm curious to know if in the past you've worked with students in architectural design build programs to create some of these installations and pieces that you've done.
I have never. I have worked with students in all kinds of other departments to help my research, students and faculty. But I've never worked, I'm trying to check to see if I'm saying the truth. Not in an academic setting, no. I mean, I've worked with architects, and I've worked with all kinds of people who understand constructions of all kinds, but never with an architecture department.
But
Okay.
Suzanne, I will add that the museum program that's supporting the project absolutely has. We partnered with Emily Ryan in supporting a Weaver Courtyard design build course. And also Keith Vanderreet has been one of our faculty fellows, and we offer graduate fellowships as well. So including students has been a big part of our program from the beginning.
Yeah, Keith is my advisor actually. So we've already talked about this project, and I think we'd be very interested in having the students participate with some good ideas and free labor as well, and kind of morphing and melding the ideas of social sustainability and community outreach with the landscape and sustainable landscapes. I just wanted to throw that out there.
Great. And hopefully it will be more like knowledge exchange than free labor.
Yeah, well, we would like that too. Thanks.
Could I make a suggestion for
Yeah.
people who are, sorry, Meg Jameson over in Film and Media Studies, for people who are here in Lawrence, a local version of this and a nice way to maybe have a chat in a socially distanced way. Right here on campus is the sensory garden that's by the audio reader. They worked, I think, with a number of different organizations and maybe through service learning with audio reader to build a garden that has a range of sensory experiences for people who don't have full sight, who are not fully sighted. And so that I think has there's a lot of this kind of cross-disciplinary appeal and a way to think about how people use the space and how they interact with the space. It might be a fun, really physical way to think about it as you're building the plan, which sounds fantastic.
Thanks. Yes, Joey, you told me about that, but we didn't have time.
You'll be back.
We will. We will. I think I've been thinking a lot about the senses, and so that garden will allow me to think about it in ways that maybe my own assumptions will, get in the way. But I think that to slow people down, I mean, just when I went into the field, just to stay still, it actually comes alive when you stop moving. So yeah, thinking about sound and smell, touch, and all those things.
So I have a small idea. I'm Helen Alexander. I'm a plant ecologist. This is not any research area of mine, but this winter I took a lot of photos of grapevines and forests because they're just really fun. They curl up and down in all sorts of ways. And so I have no idea if that little forested area in the middle of your part has any grapevines, but they would be forming some of those same kind of structures on their own, maybe. Anyway, it just kind of made me think of a biological link to the kind of shapes there.
Yes, yeah. We did talk about that, Joey, when we were there. We were filming, and I wanted to film in the space and try to describe the formation of the air by using the shapes that are there in the field. Still excited about that idea. Sheena, you might be able to tell us what's in that area.
I don't know if I remember seeing any grapevine in there. It's not to say it's not there, but it's just sort of like this little draw that has, like an ephemeral creek, sort of riparian, early successional understory species. So there's
Probably has poison ivy vines.
there's some poison ivy, lots of smilax, like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and so we have that little creek that we actually have to get over or get people over. So that is an opportunity to build a structure for that to happen. So yeah, Susan, that's one place that I might need some help.
Janine, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'm sorry. This is Sarah Lynn. I'm tuning in from a phone, so I apologize for not showing my face. But you said something, Janine, that just kind of made my head explode, and that was you said it, a curious form.
Yes.
And I love thinking about curiosity as a generator of science and also of art, and the complexity of asking and framing issues and even testing problems and making arguments through curious forms, curious kinds of through a curious dimension. And I just wanted to toss something out to the scientists in the room about what if you were to contribute to a curious form, what are the attributes of such a thing?
So maybe I can help with that question, and maybe go at it from another angle, which is one of the exciting parts of me working with another field is that it comes with its own forms and needs and functions, right? So I'm looking through my eyes as an artist at forms that maybe you would take for granted. And I'm sure there's some other equivalent in the other direction that I don't know about. And what happens is when those two visions come together, they don't really fit together. And that's where curious form evolves. And that's where we make something that neither of us could imagine. So I don't know, does that relate to anything you're saying, Sarah Lynn? Is that take it off in a different direction? Are you there?
She may be driving.
Anyway, does anybody have a thought about what her instigation there?
Well, if you're thinking about something that's completely or somewhat different, the area you had planned to do it is not far from where we have a wildlife camera placed. We're monitoring the mammals out at the field station. The deer numbers are really large and they are having quite an effect upon the forest and landscape. But of course you don't see them because they're not hanging around in the daytime. So that's another element that's occurring there.
Yeah, and the other elements that would be occurring there are humans. And they will have a big impact. And the question is, can we not be a disturbance? I learned that word from Sheena, but contribute. And what would that look like?
I've got, I guess, a comment on, I mean, I love the ear, just a fabulous structure, the inner ear, and I had the opportunity to study it a bit in grad school. That one element that I haven't heard you mention is the transformative nature of and sort of one directional nature of the ear. I think about your dream loom kind of going the other direction, coming out of your brain out into the environment. Well, the way the inner ear work, you have physical going into your ear and being transformed into electrical, in the cochlea. I don't know if if there's any way to kind of capture that spirit or essence of the thing, but I don't know, just a thought out there.
I think the cochlea itself is such a phenomenal form. Like that could be a sculpture within itself.
Oh, absolutely.
We did find that if we were to put the first part of the inner ear into that wooded area, that the cochlea could come right out into a tall grass area, invasive grass area, I think, on the other side. And it is actually next to a pond that I think was made. And so I'm just thinking about what happens inside the cochlea and how that landscape really connects to those little hairs in your cochlea and the water that has a lot to do with balance, in fact. So I think that that was a kind of lovely accident that those things ended up near each other, and I haven't quite figured out if they can really become a significant part of the experience.
Well, and I appreciate your accurate cochlear representation of having that central membrane that runs through the entire length of the thing, into the spiral, and it's sort of a, where all the hair cells and the basilar membrane live. But a prairie cover would, at least from the diagrams I've seen, would be an interesting analog.
The other thing I was thinking is that, that nerve that goes to the brain that brings those electrical signals to the brain, that could actually carry you right onto the path of the kind of hiking hiking path, which also seemed like nice because it's, I'm thinking about what all these different areas mean to us. And the fact that the labyrinth then could never end, actually, because you would continue on the hiking path if you pleased, and thinking about what happens in the unconscious and that relationship, of course. What is that relationship to the environment, so that we seem to go to nature to go inside in some ways, to be in awe, to experience the sublime, to be inspired, to heal, to process emotionally. A lot of the things that, we talk about when we think about the unconscious. So it's rich with metaphor, I think. And as much as I can tease out of the experience, the better.
Could I ask? I feel like I have walked in this exact place, and after I crossed the bridge, if I'm orienting myself correctly, after I crossed the bridge, I remember thinking, am I still in the field station, or have I crossed onto private property? Right? I remember having this distinct, like, am I in someone's field? Because I grew up on a farm and I know what that's like, and I'm like, is someone's pickup truck gonna come? Like, I don't know if I'm supposed to be here. And so I was wondering if that relationship to a prior agricultural past, and I think I actually maybe even saw parts of barbed wire. I mean, is any part of that entering your schematic thinking right now? Or is part of this design to actually erase that sense of potentially I don't belong here? Because it feels very strong for me, because the mark around the field station is sort of like, I know, the rammed earth structure, and I know that feel, and I can kind of suss out where I feel like I'm meant to belong. But beyond that, then there's this like very tentative feeling, which I think could be quite useful to not be thoroughly erased, maybe. And then that actually brings me to Emily's question a bit, maybe from the chat. Emily Ryan was bringing attention to the bridge specifically. And so I wonder if any of those things are happening in what you're thinking.
I mean, I think what you bring up is huge, and just to think that there are places we belong and we don't belong, and this idea of our relationship to nature and the unknown, and how and the mystery, and just thinking about my own experience of going into my body, and moments when I'm deep listening, and then I'm like, I touch my own fragility, and that, how startling that is, when you start to listen to your heart and you're like, it could just stop right now. So yeah, I think that not knowing where you are, I mean, that's also part of the, we've been talking a lot about the difference between the labyrinth and the maze. And the maze is a puzzle, but the labyrinth is more about, it's going to lead you somewhere. It's really about the journey, and the journey is a meditative process. I don't know where I'm going with all of that in relationship to the question you're asking, but I think it's a really beautiful question and an important one, actually.
Yeah, I mean, where that intersects with concepts of private property, or where we can be, and how we have a map that's cut off in the places that we don't belong, is really pretty, I think,
And
interesting.
also this idea of what the field station represents, versus other types of land, and that we're preserving. What are we preserving actually, besides, I think there's a whole notion there. And we have been thinking about things like farmland and things, other things that are, that the field station is preserving so that, that doesn't completely take over. And even that forest, like holding it back from, there's a lot of transgressions happening.
Yeah, I think that seems like one of the reasons that we think the McCall Tract is so interesting, because it's not reconstructed prairie, which is why we're able to play there. Like, we couldn't be doing this on the Rockefeller Tract, obviously. But there's something very interesting about a transitional ecology that has stabilized somehow, and how that embodies some of the tensions that exist in the reasons that we do our research, which is something that we were really curious to see how that plays out in some of your own questions and research.
I had a question about, are you thinking about or interested in thinking about how this piece will change or remain the same over time in the landscape? And with that, are you thinking about maybe changing some of the vegetation that's there, or that sort of thing?
Right. So that brings up big questions, even like in the field stations work, but huge questions for us. And my inkling, which has to do with Joey's presentation, is obviously not to intercede in a way that's harmful, and even better if it's helpful, whatever helpful is, that can be contested. But to actually work with how things change over time, so that the piece goes through many stages of being as it should, instead of trying to fight that, because to actually keep it the same would be to really fight. And that seems wrong. So yeah, but it's a big deal what you bring up, because it's really about, and I guess this is something that both I and the field station has to think about in terms of like upkeep versus that we're always in a process that is changing and alive, instead of something that is it either works for a second and doesn't, or it is like going back to the land in its natural way, and that is beautiful to watch.
Yeah, you have so many cool and interesting concepts that you're already sort of bringing, but I was thinking about something we think a lot about in my lab is succession, and how the landscape is disturbed and then changes and reaches some kind of equilibrium and so on. So I thought that might be something you would want to think about and incorporate thinking about this landscape.
Yeah, I think that it's inevitable, and so we have to work with it, and think of it as part of the process, a part of the making, actually, making and unmaking, right? As we see, Mel Chin's pieces is unmaking in a certain way to make. So it's a nice way to think about it.
This is going to come as no surprise for me, but actually, Janine, that stuff you were talking about in your earlier work, and even some of your other pieces, you're going through these really cool vegetation transitions, which I think is interesting to think about how there's parallels there. But one thing we've been talking about, and I don't know how much momentum we've had, is thinking about how people can view soils better. And, from the outside to the inside, I don't know how much we could do, right? But in the area where the invasive grasses are, what if people went into the earth? What if you dug something and, talking about a transition where people went into and then they came back out, right? There would almost be like they're going into the body of the earth right at the end of this year, and then they'd come back out and there'd be light again. I don't know. It's just
Yeah.
like when you were talking about, it's like, oh, we got to go underground. Like, of course, because that's all I think about is dirt. So
Yeah, well, at first the whole anatomical drawing was in the field, and I don't know how it happened, but all of a sudden we realized that that middle ear should be, well, we thought all the inner, like the outside of the ear should be out to the world, and that you should go into that. I mean, I'm thinking about the metaphors. I'm also thinking about physiologically what happens to your body from going into from that direct sunlight into the shaded area. But actually, so that's a really good question, and you're the person to ask, because I know that we don't feel covetous, or I feel I picked this up from Sheena, that particular grass that's growing there we're not so happy about, which
It's
I
Johnson grass.
right. So I want to talk about that, like what grasses we like and don't like and why. But so I feel from like the Smithson piece, the one with the big spiral, like I feel like the one thing I can't do is go into the earth. And part of that is actually, when you presented to us the projects, and I understood that so much of what important is going on in the prairie, particularly, is what's happening underground. So from our perspective, to disturb the ground, I mean, of course, everything disturbs the ground somehow, even walking into the field, like in Richard Long's, but what it would mean to, like sort of what Joey was saying, like we're allowed to do this because this part of the field isn't earmarked. Like, which roots are precious and why? And I mean, I want to wrap those roots all around me. That's like my artistic impulse. Yeah, what do you have to say about that? Like going into the ground. And
so the University of Michigan's biological station has like a big thing where you can go underground, and there's like plexiglass.
Right.
And then the root structures actually make all kinds of wicked, beautiful, they're not all spirals, but they're all kinds of structures against those glasses. And what they look like is determined by what vegetation is above ground right there. And anyway, those are usually called like rhizotrons, or they have these fancy science names. But I just, in terms of going back into the earth, right? Like our bodies go back to the earth, and some of the elements you talked about earlier, like in your pictures where the earth is at the center of your feet, right? Anyways, that's what I was thinking, was like, because my brain's always on soil probably.
Right. And, this would be going into the earth without having to die, so you could like come back with the message.
Yeah. It'd be like Oedipus, right? Yeah.
I will say that so I did my master's there, and there's always one grad student who like draws the like short stick and gets stuck doing their experiment down there, and it's incredibly depressing. Like, it's not a good summer experience to have to set up your entire experiment underground and not see the sunlight in Michigan, where you typically don't see it anyways. Like, so it wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing to make it a little bit sad. It would be realistic.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the other thing that I've been thinking about is your core samples. And so one thing is to go down, and the other thing is to bring down up. And and what that would, I guess the thing is that, I mean, I'm interested in how in the medical world, we're always trying to see into the body, and we try to see in all these ways. We use light and sound, and and I guess it's the same thing with the earth, wanting to know what's under there and what's actually happening. And that seems super intriguing to me. And then I guess I've come back to, I think that the ethical question of what we do to the land is a big one.
Can I just say real quick for everyone, since it looks like we're coming on time, that in the chat, I've put my email address. And, you know, one of the big reasons for us to be here in the Ecology Seminar was not so much to hear ourselves talk, but to hear your own questions and ideas and receive guidance from this research community. So please believe sincerely that you are warmly, warmly invited to reach out to me at any time with any questions or ideas that you have. We're very much wanting to be in conversation with you.
Yeah, that's great. That's probably a good place to leave it. So please do reach back out, and thanks to you both, and thanks for bringing these ideas. I think there's many of us here that would love to just keep talking about it. It pulls our brains in a nice way for the scientists, and to also just collaborate.
Well, I'm so appreciative for you giving me your time and your thoughts. So I just look forward to more, and I'm open to to the help, actually. Don't let me go astray.
Cool. Well, thank you all, and we'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.
Happy Friday.
You too.
Thanks, Ben.